We have grown used to the idea that rising rates of severe depression and suicide are the heavy price of living in the modern world. Carol Weissman defied every modern risk factor. He was a wealthy industrial psychologist, a man of immense drive, and by all accounts, one of the most well-integrated minds of the late 20th century. On December 20th, 1994, Weissman sat in his locked study, swallowing a lethal dose of cyanide. He left behind a 3-page letter written in a hand that was shaky but precise. It contained no apologies and no signs of a traditional psychological breakdown, only a series of hyper-rational instructions for his estate. The forensic evidence suggests something other than a man surrendering to despair. Weissman's final act was a calculated, tactical retreat from a threat he could no longer escape. Weissman's will contained a bizarre final demand. He requested that his cutting-edge psychological papers be handed immediately to his oldest friend, a man whose life was dedicated to archaeology, not psychiatry. The archaeologist was working in the Hebrides at the time, completely absorbed in the study of Neolithic remains. He left the filing cabinet sitting unopened in a hallway for months, his mind entirely occupied with the distant past. This distraction is what saved his life. The invisible forces watching Weissman's home saw a man interested in stone tools and ancient ruins, and they concluded his friend was no threat to their secret. To understand why Weissman died, we have to look inside those abandoned files and examine the terrifying experiments he was conducting before the end. Weissman's corporate work had revealed a nightmare. Workplace sabotage and executive suicides were spiking so high they defied every known economic and social cause. He realized that traditional psychology was failing because it only studied external behavior. He turned to phenomenology, a method developed to map the internal, hidden structures of human consciousness itself. Weissman began using small, clinical doses of mescaline to dismantle the automatic mental habits keeping human beings trapped in a state of constant, outward-facing tension. He theorized that the human mind functions like an outward-facing radar. Evolution has conditioned us to scan for physical threats in the environment, acting as a filter, preventing us from looking back into the dark void of our subconscious. The mescaline effectively reversed this radar. It collapsed the outward filters and allowed his perception to scan inward, illuminating erratic, moving shapes hiding in the center of his mind. By removing these biological filters, Weissman inadvertently tripped a silent alarm, alerting an alien presence that it had been discovered. As Weissman looked inward, he felt the distinct presence of a hostile, living entity darting out of his perception and sinking deeper into his mind. The retaliation was immediate. Whenever he tried to observe this entity, he was hit with severe physical nausea, splitting nerve pains, and a crushing sense of unnatural depression. This is a defensive protocol. When a host gets too close to the truth, the entity forces overwhelming suicidal urges into the host's mind to eliminate the threat of being exposed. This evidence recontextualizes Weissman's final moments in that locked study. An invisible parasite murdered Weissman to protect a secret that spans the entirety of human history. If these entities have truly been feeding on us, they should leave visible anomalies in our historical record. Around 1300 BC, the Manetho papyri record an epidemic of suicides striking Egypt during the reign of King Horemheb, a time when the empire was at the peak of its power and stability. At the exact same moment, over 1,000 miles away, the Hittite Empire record a statistically identical collapse. These were thriving civilizations with no internal social or economic reason for a mass psychological breakdown. The simultaneous nature of these events across separate cultures points to a deliberate cull. The parasites strike whenever human civilization becomes too secure or too advanced. Human history is a tightly managed enclosure, manipulated by an unseen predator that feeds on our progress. By the 1800s, human consciousness was reaching a critical threshold. We were producing minds capable of seeing life from a higher, almost superhuman perspective, threatening the parasites' control. The parasites targeted these visionaries directly. They drove 19th century geniuses like Robert Schumann into sudden, tragic madness to ensure their work never elevated the rest of the species. They used similar strikes of insanity to silence optimistic thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, neutralizing philosophical threats before they could empower the human race. These entities act as a mind-jamming device. They blur our emotions and keep us artificially weak and pessimistic, ensuring we never discover our own power of self-renewal. Weissman realized that the parasite's power depends entirely on their ability to stay hidden. They operate like a radar jamming device. Once you identify the source of the interference, the jamming loses its hold on the signal. Awareness shatters their illusion. When a person realizes their depression is an external attack rather than a personal failure, the mind's innate strength rallies, driving the parasites out of the depths and back into the dark.